The sound is the first thing you truly remember, not the sight, not the fear, but the sound. A roar so immense, so absolute, it swallows every other noise in the world, including the sound of your own screaming. And then, just as suddenly, it is replaced by the opposite, a silence so deep and complete it feels like the world has ended. I don't know how long I was huddled in the wreckage of my own basement. Minutes, an hour, time had shattered along with the rest of my life. The air tasted of dust and rain, and the splintered bones of my own home. I was alive. That was the first miracle. The second, I would soon learn, was far more complicated. If you're listening, and you've ever had to face the wreckage of your own life and find the strength to stand up, please subscribe and let me know. This is a story about losing everything, only to find the one thing you never knew you had. It is a story about the cruelty of family, the kindness of strangers, and the secrets a good man leaves behind. My name is Helen Carter. I am 68 years old, and for 45 of those years, I lived in a small, sturdy house on Maple Street. It wasn't a mansion, but it was a fortress of memories. My late husband, Frank, and I had built it together, not just with wood and nails, but with a lifetime of shared moments. Now, as I pulled myself up through a jagged hole where the kitchen floor used to be, I saw that our fortress had been turned into a doll's house with the front wall ripped off, its intimate secrets exposed to the weeping gray sky. The living room, where Frank's favorite armchair had sat for 30 years, was simply gone. The mantelpiece, which had held the photographic history of my family, my son Paul's first steps, his graduation, his wedding day, was a pile of splintered wood and memories turned to mud. The kitchen, where the scent of coffee and baking had always lingered, was now open to the elements, my mother's old recipe book a swollen, ruined pulp. My hand went to my mouth to stifle a sob that was half dust, half grief. I had survived, but my life, my history, the carefully constructed nest of my past, had been utterly and completely obliterated. As I stumbled through the debris, my mind, numb with shock, could only form one coherent thought, one name, one destination. Paul, my son, my only child. He lived just 20 minutes away, on the other side of town, in a new, pristine suburban development that the tornado had, by some cruel twist of fate, completely spared. His house was my only safe harbor, the only anchor I had left in this new, terrifying world. Of course they would take me in. They were my family. Paul was a good boy, a good man, a little soft perhaps, a little too easily swayed by his wife Laura, a woman who liked things just so. Her house was a monument to order and cleanliness, a place of beige carpets and spotless glass surfaces. My own home, with its comfortable clutter and lived-in warmth, had always made her visibly anxious. But that didn't matter now. This was a crisis. In a crisis, family comes together. That is the first and most sacred rule. I began the slow, painful journey on foot. My car was an unrecognizable hunk of twisted metal in what used to be the driveway. The streets were a war zone of downed trees, dangling power lines, and the dazed, shocked faces of my neighbors. It was a landscape of shared ruin. As I picked my way through the wreckage of my own garden, my foot hit something hard. I bent down and brushed away the mud and the wet, torn leaves. It was a small metal box, dented but intact. It was the box where I kept my most precious photographs. Most were ruined, a collage of waterlogged, faded colors, but one, protected by the pictures on top of it, was almost untouched. It was a photo of Frank, taken on our last anniversary. He was smiling, his kind, honest eyes crinkling at the corners. He looked so strong, so dependable. I slipped the small, damp photograph into the pocket of my torn, wet coat. It was the only thing I had managed to save from the wreckage of my life. It was all I had left of him. Or so I thought. The 20-minute drive to Paul's house became a 2-hour trek through a nightmare. I finally turned onto his street, and the change was so abrupt, it was dizzying. Here, the sun was trying to break through the clouds. The lawns were green and perfectly manicured. The houses stood tall and untouched, their windows clean, their roofs intact. It was another world, a world that had not been broken. I walked up the pristine, paved driveway to their beautiful, modern home. I saw my reflection in the polished glass of the front door, and I barely recognized the woman I saw. My salt and pepper hair was a wild, matted mess, soaked with rain and plastered to my head. My face was smudged with dirt, my coat was torn, my shoes caked in mud. I was a refugee, a survivor, a ghost from the other side of the storm. I raised my hand, my knuckles raw and scraped, and I knocked on the door of the only safe harbor I had left in the world. I waited, my body trembling with a mixture of cold, shock, and a desperate, bone-deep need for the comfort of my own son. I knew that in a moment that door would open, and my son's arms would be around me, and I would finally be safe. The sacred rule would hold. Family would come together. The lock clicked. The door swung open, and my new life, a life I could never have imagined in my wildest nightmares, began. The door swung open, and for a moment, my heart soared with a relief so profound it almost buckled my knees. My son, Paul, stood there. He was safe. He was unharmed. He was dressed in a comfortable-looking polo shirt and khakis, his hair perfectly combed. Behind him, I could see their living room, a haven of clean, beige tranquility, the television humming softly in the background. It was a scene of such perfect, untouchable normalcy. It felt like a dream. He stared at me. His initial expression was one of pure, uncomprehending shock. He looked at my matted hair, my dirt-streaked face, my torn and muddy coat, as if he were looking at a creature from another planet, a ghost who had inexplicably materialized on his pristine doorstep. "Mom?" he said, his voice a stunned whisper. "My God, what happened to you?" "The tornado, Paul," I said, my own voice a hoarse, trembling thing. It hit Maple Street. The house. It's gone. Everything is gone." The first tears I had not allowed myself to cry finally broke free, hot and stinging, tracing clean paths through the grime on my cheeks. I took a stumbling step forward, my arms instinctively reaching for him, for the comfort and safety that only a son can provide. "Oh, Paul." He did not move. He did not step forward to embrace me. He just stood there, his face a mask of horrified disbelief, blocking the doorway to his warm, safe home. It was then that Laura, my daughter-in-law, appeared behind him. She was dressed in immaculate white yoga pants and a fitted top, a picture of serene suburban perfection. She took in my appearance, and her perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose in an expression that was not one of sympathy, but of pure, unadulterated annoyance. It was the look of a woman whose perfectly clean floor was just about to be sullied by a pair of muddy shoes. "Helen," she said, her voice as cool and smooth as the polished glass of her front door. "What a mess." "Laura, please," I whispered, my voice breaking. "The house is gone. I have nowhere else to go." I tried to take another step inside, out of the cold, damp air, but Paul put a hand on my arm, stopping me. It was not a comforting touch. It was a barrier. "Mom, wait," he said, his eyes darting nervously from my face to his wife's. Just wait a second." He and Laura exchanged a look. It was a quick, silent conversation, but it spoke volumes. I saw Laura's eyes narrow, a subtle, almost imperceptible shake of her head. I saw my son's face, a battlefield of conflicting emotions, a flicker of a son's duty warring with a husband's fear, and I saw, with a clarity that was more painful than any wound, which side was winning. Paul turned back to me, and he could no longer meet my eyes. He looked at a spot on the wall just over my shoulder, his face a mask of miserable, gutless shame. "Mom, look," he began, his voice low and rushed. "Of course we want to help. But this is it's a lot right now. We weren't prepared." I stared at him, my mind unable to process the words I was hearing. Not prepared? I had lost my home. I had nearly lost my life. What kind of preparation was required to show a little basic human decency to your own mother? "We have a very structured life here, you know that," he continued, still not looking at me. "The kids' schedules, my work, Laura's, things are just very settled." And then he said the words that would sever a bond 40 years in the making, the words that would echo in the ruins of my heart for the rest of my life. The thing is, Mom, he said, his voice dropping to an apologetic whisper, a whisper of pure, unforgivable cowardice. We need our privacy. You can't stay here. The world, which had already been tilted on its axis, now spun into a silent, black void. He was turning me away. My son, my only child, was turning his homeless, traumatized mother away from his door because she was an inconvenience, because she was a disruption to their structured life. The last of my hope died in that moment. The sacred rule had been broken. Family had not come together. Family had just told me I was not welcome. But the humiliation was not yet complete. That final, exquisite touch was delivered by my daughter-in-law. Laura, seeing my stunned, silent devastation and mistaking it for acquiescence, stepped forward. She was holding something in her hands, a small, tightly rolled bundle of green canvas. "We're not monsters, Helen," she said, her voice now full of a bright, false charity. It was the voice of a woman making a tax-deductible donation. "We want to help. We can't have you stay in the house, of course, but you can't be out in the elements, so we thought." She held the green bundle out to me. "You can set this up in the backyard for the night," she said, her smile a grotesque parody of kindness. "It's a very good tent, waterproof. It will keep you dry until the emergency shelters open in the morning, then you can go there." A tent. She was handing me a tent. I looked from the tent in her hands to the ashamed, downcast face of my son, and then back to her cruel, smiling face. And in that moment, the grief, the shock, the heartbreak, it all receded, replaced by a feeling I had not known I was capable of, a cold, quiet, and utterly profound emptiness. My hand, acting of its own accord, reached out and took the tent. It felt heavy in my arms, heavy with the weight of their betrayal. "Thank you," I heard myself whisper. The voice did not sound like my own. It was the voice of a stranger, a ghost. "You're so welcome," Laura chirped, her relief palpable. The problem had been managed. The mess had been contained. She had successfully protected her beige carpets from the inconvenient wreckage of my life. I turned without another word. I walked away from the warm, golden light of their doorway, away from the sun who would not meet my eyes, away from the woman who had just handed me a tent. I walked back down their perfect, paved driveway, into the cold, drizzling rain, my bare feet stumbling on the smooth stones. I did not go to the backyard. I went to my car, or what was left of it in their driveway where I'd left it from a previous visit. I opened the passenger door and placed the tent, this monument to my own worthlessness in their eyes, on the seat beside me. I sank into the driver's seat, the cold, damp fabric of my clothes seeping into the upholstery. I had nowhere to go. I had no one. I had lost my home, and in the space of 5 minutes, I had lost my son. I was utterly and completely alone. I rested my head on the steering wheel, and for the first time since the storm had hit, I began to cry. Not the hot tears of grief, but the cold, silent, empty tears of absolute despair. I don't know how long I sat there in the car, adrift in a silent, gray ocean of despair. The world outside the rain-streaked windows of Paul's driveway was a blur of muted colors and indistinct shapes. The tent sat on the passenger seat beside me, a silent, green monument to my own obsolescence. It was a cruel, tangible symbol of my new place in the world, outside, alone, and under canvas. My mind, in a state of shock, kept replaying the scene at the door, trying to make sense of the senseless. Paul's downcast eyes, Laura's bright, charitable smile. "We need our privacy." The words echoed, each repetition a fresh, twisting turn of the knife. I had spent my entire life making a home for him, and when my home was destroyed, his had no room for me. I had given him everything I had, and in my moment of greatest need, he had given me a tent. I thought about Frank. What would he have done? What would he have said? He had been a man of quiet, unshakable principles. Family was not a concept to him. It was a fortress. The thought of his own son turning his mother away, it would have been an act of sacrilege, a betrayal so profound it would have broken his heart. My own heart, it seemed, was breaking for the both of us now. My body was a roadmap of aches and pains from the storm, but they were nothing compared to the deep internal ache of being abandoned. I felt a weariness so profound it was almost a physical weight, pressing me down into the driver's seat. What was I supposed to do now? Go to a shelter, as Laura had so helpfully suggested. Become a charity case, a nameless, displaced old woman lining up for a cot and a bowl of soup. The humiliation of it all was a bitter, metallic taste in my mouth. It was in that moment, at the absolute nadir of my despair, that my phone rang. The sound, a cheerful, generic ringtone, was so jarring in the quiet, grief-stricken bubble of the car that I actually jumped. I fumbled in my damp coat pocket, my fingers clumsy with cold and shock, and pulled it out. The screen was cracked from the storm, but it was still working. An unknown number. My first instinct was to ignore it. What good could possibly come from the outside world now? But some small, surviving flicker of hope, or perhaps just sheer, exhausted instinct, made me slide my thumb across the screen. "Hello?" I said, my voice a hoarse, weak thing I barely recognized. "Helen? Helen, is that you? Thank God." The voice on the other end was familiar, a warm, steady anchor in the swirling chaos of my mind. It was my neighbor, George Henderson. A kind, decent widower in his 70s, who had lived across the street from me and Frank for 30 years. "George," I whispered, a fresh wave of tears threatening to overwhelm me. "Helen, are you all right?" he asked, his voice filled with a genuine, frantic concern that was a stark, painful contrast to my own son's cool detachment. "I saw what was left of your house. I've been calling you for hours. I was so worried." I'm okay, George," I managed to say, the lie catching in my throat. "I'm safe. I'm at Paul's house." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. George knew my son, he knew Laura, and he was a shrewd judge of character. "And they're taking good care of you?" he asked, a careful, questioning note in his voice. I couldn't answer. A choked, painful sob was the only reply I could manage. The simple, human kindness in his voice had broken through the dam of my shock, and the full, crushing weight of my son's rejection came crashing down on me. "Oh, Helen," he said, his voice now full of a deep, sorrowful understanding. He didn't need me to say the words. He knew. "Listen to me. Are you still in your car?" "Yes," I whispered. "Don't go anywhere. Don't go to a shelter. You get yourself a room at the downtown Marriott, the nicest one they have. Send the bill to me. You hear me, Helen? We'll sort this all out tomorrow. But tonight, you are not a charity case." His words, so full of a simple, powerful dignity, were like a lifeline, but then his tone shifted, becoming urgent, excited. "Helen, that's not the only reason I'm calling," he said, his voice dropping. "The rescue crews are here, sifting through the wreckage. They're trying to salvage what they can for people. I've been helping them at your place." He paused, and I could hear the sound of heavy machinery in the background. "They were in your basement. The furnace. The tornado ripped it right off the wall, tore it from the concrete." "Okay," I said, not understanding where this was going. "Well, behind it, Helen, behind where the furnace used to be, there was a section of the wall that was different, newer concrete. They thought it was a structural repair. But one of the firemen hit it with a sledgehammer, and it was hollow." I sat up a little straighter in the driver's seat, my own sorrow momentarily forgotten, replaced by a deep and profound confusion. "Hollow?" I repeated. "Yeah," he said, his voice now a low, excited buzz. "And inside, Helen, it's some kind of box, a huge old metal box, like a safe, an old one. It must weigh a ton." We all thought it was just some old, forgotten junk, but one of the corners was split open from the impact. He took a deep, shaky breath. "Helen, Frank was a smart man, a quiet man. Did he ever mention anything to you about a safe, about collecting anything?" My mind flew back through the years. Frank. He had been so prudent, so careful. A child of the Great Depression, he had a deep, ingrained distrust of banks and the stock market. "You put your faith in things you can hold in your hand, Helen," he used to say. "Land, gold, things that have real, timeless value." He had a small collection of old coins, I knew that. But a safe? In the wall? "What's inside, George?" I asked, my heart beginning a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. I heard him turn away from the phone and shout to someone, "Hey, Bill, what did you say was in that box again?" I heard a muffled reply. George came back on the line. His voice was a hushed, disbelieving whisper. "Helen," he said, his voice trembling with a mixture of awe and shock. "The box is full of them, dozens of canvas bags, and the bags, they're full of gold coins, gold eagles, Krugerrands, maple leafs. I don't know how many. But Helen, there are a lot. An awful, awful lot." I stared out the rain-streaked windshield at my son's beautiful, perfect house. I looked at the tent, the symbol of my worth in their eyes, sitting on the passenger seat. And then I thought of the box. Frank's box, his rainy day fund, hidden behind a furnace for a day he had prayed would never come. But it had come. The storm had arrived. And my quiet, prudent, and secretly brilliant husband had just reached out from beyond the grave and handed me a thunderbolt. The drive from my son's house to the ruins of my own was a journey between two different universes. I had left this street hours ago as a homeless, heartbroken refugee, clutching a photograph as my only possession. I was returning as something else. I didn't have a name for it yet. The idea was too vast, too impossible, to fit into my stunned and reeling mind. Was I a victim? An heiress? The beneficiary of the strangest, most tragic lottery ticket in history? George met me at the police barricade that had been set up at the end of my street. The scene was even worse in the harsh, late afternoon light. It was a landscape of raw, gaping wounds, of houses torn open and lives scattered to the wind. George put a steadying arm around me as he led me through the debris, back to the pile of splintered wood and memories that used to be my home. 2 police officers were standing guard by the crater that was once my basement, and in the center of that crater, caked in mud and scarred by the storm, sat the box. It was not a box. It was a small iron sarcophagus. It was an old black cast iron safe, the kind I had only seen in old Western movies. It was immense, solid, and looked like it had been forged in the heart of a mountain. The force of the tornado had split a seam on one corner, and through the jagged gash I could see the dull, unmistakable glint of gold. "We haven't touched it, ma'am," the older of the 2 officers said, his voice respectful. "Waited for you. We've got a crew from the locksmith coming to open it properly." I just stared at it, my hand instinctively going to the old photograph of Frank in my pocket. He had done this. This quiet, unassuming man, who fixed his own leaky faucets and drove the same pickup truck for 15 years, he had secretly been a dragon, hoarding a treasure beneath his own house. It wasn't for himself, it was for me. It was his final, silent act of protection, a fortress of wealth built to withstand a storm he could never have predicted. The locksmiths arrived, and the process of opening the safe was a tense, surgical affair. A small crowd of neighbors and rescue workers had gathered at a respectful distance, their faces a mixture of curiosity and awe. The story of the treasure chest found in the old Carter house was already spreading through the wreckage of our neighborhood. Finally, after 30 minutes of drilling and prying, the heavy, groaning door of the safe swung open. The silence that followed was absolute. The safe was packed to the brim with small, heavy canvas bank bags, each one neatly stenciled with a date. 1,975, 1,982, 1,995, 40 years of savings. 40 years of quiet, secret prudence. The lead locksmith, a young man with tattooed arms, reached in and lifted out one of the bags. It was heavier than it looked. He untied the drawstring at the top and poured the contents into his gloved hand. A river of gold spilled out into the gray afternoon light. The coins were beautiful, heavy, and radiated a soft, buttery glow that seemed to push back against the surrounding devastation. "Gold eagles," the young officer breathed, his voice full of wonder. "American gold eagles. A whole bag of them." They opened another bag. South African Krugerrands, another. Canadian maple leafs. It was a king's ransom, a pirate's treasure, a lifetime of secret, silent work. There were also documents, sealed in waterproof envelopes, the original deed to the house, paid in full, old savings bonds. and a single handwritten letter, the envelope addressed simply to My Helen. My hands trembled as I took it. The paper was old, but the ink was as dark and clear as the day he wrote it. My dearest Helen, it began. If you are reading this, then it means the worst has happened, and I have had to leave you alone in this world. I am sorry for that, more than words can say. I am also sorry for this secret. I never told you because I didn't want you to worry. I didn't want this to change the simple, honest life we built together. This was never meant to be a fortune. It was meant to be a foundation. A final safety net for the only person I have ever truly loved. I don't trust the markets, Helen. I don't trust the promises of politicians or the whims of the economy. But I trust this. I trust the weight of it in my hand. It is real. It is lasting. This is for you. To keep you safe, to keep you warm, to make sure you never have to ask anyone for anything, ever again. Use it to rebuild, use it to live, use it to be happy. All my love, forever, your Frank. The tears that came now were not of sorrow or despair. They were tears of a profound, overwhelming, and heartbreaking love. He had seen the future. He had seen a day when I might be alone and vulnerable. And he had built me an ark. Over the next few hours, the contents of the safe were carefully inventoried by the police and an emergency appraiser from the bank. The final tally was so staggering, so absurd, that it no longer felt real. It was a number from a dream. The gold alone, at current market value, was worth just over $3 million. In the space of a single catastrophic day, I had gone from a comfortable retired widow to a homeless refugee, and now I was a multi-millionaire. I spent that night not in a shelter, not in my car, and certainly not in a tent in my son's backyard. I spent it in the presidential suite of the downtown Marriott, a room so large and luxurious it felt like a palace, all thanks to the quiet generosity of my neighbor, George. As I stood on the balcony, looking out at the glittering lights of a city that now felt like it belonged to me, I thought about the sheer, cosmic irony of it all. I thought about my son Paul and his wife Laura in their perfect, pristine house, so worried about protecting their privacy from their own homeless mother. They had turned me away because they saw me as a burden, a mess, a financial liability. They had no idea that they had just turned away a walking, talking, winning lottery ticket. They had no idea that the woman they had offered a tent to could now buy their entire pristine suburban street and turn it into a parking lot if she wanted to. A new feeling, one I had not allowed myself to feel until now, began to bubble up inside me, cold and hard and clear. It was not joy. It was not even satisfaction. It was a sense of profound and terrible power. Frank had told me to use the money to be happy, and I would. But first, I was going to use it to teach my son and his lovely wife a long overdue lesson about the true price of privacy. The week that followed was a blur of activity, a whirlwind of bankers, lawyers, and financial advisors. I, Helen Carter, the woman who used to clip coupons and worry about the price of gasoline, was suddenly the subject of hushed, respectful meetings in glass-walled boardrooms. The story of the tornado treasure, as the local news had dubbed it, had made me a minor celebrity, but I did not feel like a celebrity. I felt like a general, quietly amassing her forces before a final, decisive battle. I used Frank's fortune exactly as he had intended. I established a foundation to help rebuild the homes of my neighbors on Maple Street, the ones who had lost everything, the ones who had shown me more kindness in a single hour than my own son had in a lifetime. I bought myself a beautiful new condominium downtown, a place of light and air and stunning views. I was not just rebuilding my house, I was rebuilding my life on a new, unshakable foundation of my own making. Throughout it all, there was a profound and telling silence from my son. I knew, through the grapevine of our small town, that the story of the safe had reached him. I could only imagine the conversations, the recriminations, the sheer greedy horror that must have filled their perfect private home. The woman they had offered a tent to was now one of the wealthiest women in the city. The sheer cosmic irony of it must have been a bitter pill to swallow. The call finally came 10 days after the storm. It was Paul. His voice was a strange, unfamiliar thing, a cloying mixture of feigned concern and a desperate, crawling humility. "Mom?" he said, his voice a near whisper. I heard the news about the safe. It's a miracle. I'm so happy for you. Are you, Paul? I asked, my voice as calm and cool as the marble of my new countertops. Of course I am, he insisted, a little too loudly. Listen, Mom, about that night. Laura and I, we feel just terrible. We were in shock from the storm. We weren't thinking straight. What we did, what we said, it was unforgivable. We've been sick with worry about you. Sick with regret, I thought, is more like it. We'd love to see you, he continued, his voice now oozing with a desperate syrupy sweetness. To apologize in person, to celebrate your good fortune, as a family. The word family hung in the air between us, a hollow, tarnished thing, but I knew this moment was coming, and I was prepared. Of course, Paul, I said, my voice bright and forgiving. I'd like that very much. Why don't you and Laura come to my new place for brunch on Sunday? I'll send you the address. They arrived at my new penthouse apartment on Sunday, their faces a perfect practiced performance of remorse and loving admiration. They brought flowers. They brought a ridiculously expensive bottle of champagne. Laura, the woman who had handed me a tent, rushed to embrace me, her eyes wide with a false, tearful sincerity. Oh, Helen, she cried, clutching my arm. I can't tell you how ashamed I am. We were just so panicked. I don't know what we were thinking. Can you ever forgive us? I smiled, a serene, pleasant smile that revealed nothing. Of course, dear, I said, patting her hand. Let's not talk about it. Let's have a lovely brunch. I led them onto my sprawling balcony, which overlooked the entire city. A beautiful table was set, catered by the finest restaurant in town. They looked at the opulent spread, at the panoramic views, at my elegant new life, and I could see the raw, naked greed in their eyes. They didn't see a mother they had wronged. They saw a fortune they had almost let slip through their fingers. We made small talk. They gushed about the apartment. They asked endless, probing questions about the money, about my investments, about my plans. Their apologies were forgotten, replaced by a desperate, fawning attempt to secure their place in my new golden world. Finally, after the plates were cleared, I decided it was time. You know, Paul, I began, my voice light and conversational. You were right that night. This new life, it is a lot to manage. A woman my age, with all this complexity. I have been thinking about what you said, about needing help. A look of pure, triumphant relief passed between them. This was it. This was the moment their apology was accepted, their place restored. They were back in. And I've realized, I continued, that I do want to help secure your future. Your privacy is important. And I want to make sure you and Laura have a home that is truly your own, a place where you can feel secure forever. Tears of gratitude welled up in Laura's eyes. Paul was beaming, his face shining with the bliss of a man who had just dodged a multi-million-dollar bullet. I reached into my handbag and pulled out 2 long, elegant envelopes. I slid one across the table to Paul and the other to Laura. This is for you, I said. A new beginning. With trembling, eager hands, they opened the envelopes. I watched as they pulled out the documents inside. I watched as their expressions of joyful anticipation slowly curdled into confusion, and then into pure, horrified disbelief. What is this? Paul stammered, his face ashen. This is the deed to our house. That's right, I said calmly. But it's a transfer of ownership, he said, his voice a choked whisper. It says our house has been sold. Indeed it has, I replied, taking a calm sip of my mimosa. I bought it yesterday, for cash, for a very, very generous price, I might add. Your mortgage is paid off, you're completely debt-free. They just stared at me, their minds unable to compute what was happening. And this, Laura whispered, holding up the second document with a shaking hand. This is a rental agreement. It is, I said, my smile never wavering. It's a month-to-month lease for my new tenants. The rent is due on the 1st of every month, and it is, I assure you, set at the full current market rate. The silence on the balcony was absolute, broken only by the distant sound of city traffic. But why? Paul finally asked, his voice the sound of a breaking heart. I leaned forward, my smile finally vanishing, replaced by a look of cold, hard, and final clarity. "Because you taught me a very valuable lesson, you two," I said, my voice a low, cutting whisper. "You taught me what our relationship is really about. It's not about love. It's not about family. It's a transaction. You live in my house, you pay me rent, and if you are one day late, I will have you evicted. That is our new relationship. It is one based on a contract. Because I can no longer trust one based on love." I stood up from the table. "And now," I said, my voice ringing with a finality that was as absolute as the grave, "I believe you were concerned about my privacy, and I about yours. So let me give you the one thing you have always wanted." I looked at them, at their shattered, ruined faces. "You wanted your privacy," I said, my voice cold as ice. "I'm giving it to you, permanently. Now, if you'll excuse me," I said, turning my back on them. "I have a life to live. The rent is due on the 1st. Don't be late." And with that, I walked back into my beautiful, sunlit apartment, leaving them alone on the balcony with the wreckage of their own greed. I did not look back. My past was a house that had been destroyed by a storm, and I had no intention of ever rebuilding it.